Welcome to segment 4 of lecture 2, Analysis of English Grammar. We'll continue our way into the grammar, setting the scene as it were, for the systematic journey through the major systems of the clause starting next week in lecture 3. We began to lay the foundation for creating a map of the grammar, a map showing the full resources of the grammar as a resource for constructing meanings as wordings. Let's come back to something that I introduced earlier in this lecture, the rank scale. What's the rank scale? It's a compositional hierarchy of grammatical units, from clause down to morpheme. So if we look at this schematic overview of the grammar, then along the vertical axis you have rank represented. Clauses constitute the highest ranking unit. They consist of groups or phrases. Groups consist of words, and by another step not shown in the schematic overview, words consist of morphemes in a language like English and also Chinese. At the same time, we can also view the grammar in terms of the strands of meaning, the different functions that the grammatical resources have evolved to serve. And this is the horizontal axis, metafunction. So horizontally you have metafunction, the strands of meaning as I put it, logical, experiential, interpersonal and textual. And vertically the compositional scale or the compositional hierarchy, the rank scale. Let's now review the rank scale and talk about it in some more detail. In English, as in Chinese, the rank scale consists of 4 ranks. So 4 units along the compositional hierarchy. Clause. Clauses consist of groups, phrases. Groups then include nominal groups, verbal groups and adverbial groups, and phrases, prepositional phrases. Groups in turn consist of words, and words in turn consist of morphemes. That's the rank scale in English, and as I said also in Chinese, for example. Let me give you an initial example of this. Now take the clause, gentle breezes blew over the Nile. This comes from a retelling of a traditional folk tale. So in this little snippet you have here, gentle breezes blew over the Nile. So gentle breezes blew over the Nile. The women who rowed the boat were strong and graceful. Mutemwia's voice was sweet to Pharaoh's ears as she steered the boat and sang. So gentle breezes blew over the Nile. This is a clause, and it consists of a number of groups, and the groups consist of words, and the words are morphemes. What does it look like? Well, this is a representation of the composition of the clause into groups, groups into words, and words into morphemes. So this tree diagram, as they're called, this tree diagram shows that the clause consists of 3 groups. Gentle breezes, then blew, and then over the Nile, which is in fact a prepositional phrase with a downrank group within it. As you can see, in the limiting case, a group consists of a single word, like blue. Now if we then turn to words, we see that the first group consists of 2 words, gentle breezes. The second group of a single word, blue, and the third element, as I said, is a prepositional phrase consists of the preposition over and a nominal group embedded in it. And finally, as an illustration of the way in which words may consist of morphemes, you have breeze plus z, or breezes. So the z is a suffix, it's a morpheme that comes, an affix that comes at the end of a word, and in this case, as you know, it signals, it marks, it expresses, it realizes plural. So one breeze, many breezes. This is then an illustration of the compositional organization of a clause in terms of units of different classes and their units in turn. So we start with the clause. We note that it consists of 3 units. In fact, 2 of them are groups and 1 is a phrase. Once we move down 1 rank, then we can begin to look into the internal organization of the groups and the phrase. Like, as I said, gentle breezes consisting of 2 words, gentle and breezes. Blue of a single word, blue. And then you have the prepositional phrase, preposition plus the down-ranked or embedded nominal group. Words, in turn, consists of 1 or more morphemes. And I took the example of breezes that consists of 2 morphemes, breeze plus z. Now you have interesting cases like blue. And if you recognize that blue is the past form of blow, and you think, well, oughtn't it to be blowed? Well, you know that blue is a strong or regular verb, and in fact blue, in a sense, incorporates both blow plus the past tense. So that's an interesting feature. We won't pursue it now, but it's a characteristic of a number of words in English. And finally, then, morphemes. These are the smallest grammatical units. Breeze plus z, or is, breeze is, in English. Now, as an aside, many of you will know Chinese, and you'll know the Chinese writing system, which is logographic, unlike the English writing system, which is essentially phonemic. It's an alphabet essentially used to represent phonemes, although there are interesting departures from this principle, unlike, say, in Spanish, if you're studying Spanish, which is a purely phonemic writing system. In any case, in Chinese, unlike in English, the graphemes are not letters, but characters. And the characters represent morphemes, not units in the system of sounds, not units in the phonology. So in Chinese, you have a fairly clear sense of morphemes, and morphemic boundaries are fairly clear. And this, of course, relates to the nature of the writing system. Whereas in English, you have a fairly clear sense of words because they tend to correspond to orthographic words or graphological words. And graphological orthographic words are indicated by spaces between them, like gentle, breezes, blue, over, the, and Nile. Let me take one more example. I'll take this from another text. It's adapted from another text. It's in one of these question-answer forum. Hello, we've just moved into a new house and I've been working hard all morning. I've been trying to get my new room in order. This has not been easy because I own over 1,000 books. To make matters worse, the room is rather small, so I've temporarily put my books on the floor. Now this is an example somebody cites, and they wonder if the following version should be better. We've just moved into the house. I've worked all morning. I have tried, etc. Now we may come back to this, but the example I will use is a version of this. I've been working hard all morning. So it's just to give you a bit of a sense of how this kind of example would fit naturally into a passage of text. I'll change it a little bit so that we can play around with it. So the version I have here is, have you been working hard this morning? Not you have been working hard this morning, but have you been working hard this morning? That's a clause, certainly. Or we can ask, what does it consist of? Well, traditional grammar would tell us it consists of words. Have you been working hard this morning? Or we can ask, what classes of words are there? And traditional grammar would have an answer. You would say verb, have verb, you pronoun, been verb, working verb, hard adverb, this determiner, morning noun. So in the previous part of the lecture we looked at this a little bit, and we looked at the taxonomy of word classes that we'll be using, and we discussed in particular determiners, the, this, that, these, those, and so on, and also other nominal word classes like nouns and adjectives and pronouns. This was the model in traditional grammar. It's the model of words and clauses, or because the term sentence was often used, words and sentences. But to be consistent with our terminology, we'll say words and clauses. However, it doesn't actually take much work to show, by manipulating the clause, by looking at alternative versions of the clause, that the verbs don't serve directly in the clause, but they serve in groups that function in the clause. So, for example, if you check alternative sequences, and we start with, have you been working hard this morning? You can see that you could also have, this morning, have you been working hard? And what appears to move around, as it were, is not this on its own, or morning on its own, but it's a group of these two words, this morning. And that's one piece of evidence showing that they don't function individually in the clause, but as a group. In this case, a nominal group. So you could say that you can move around this morning the group of words, a nominal group as that we've already met. Or another version would be, you've been working hard this morning, where you have, instead of have you, you have. And you see the verbs are no longer split, have, been working, but rather you, and then been working, have been working. You can also see that if you have a word like hard, for example, you can actually expand it. And that's also evidence that hard is in fact the limiting case of a group, but it's expandable precisely because it is a group. So we could say very hard, for example, or much harder than your neighbor, or surprisingly hard, or surprisingly much harder than your neighbor. So that's another piece of evidence showing what appear to be single words are in fact just the limiting case of groups consisting of one word. But they always have the potential for being expanded, and the expansion then will begin to show the potential of the structure of the group. So let's introduce groups in between words and clauses. Now we can recognize in this example, have you been working hard this morning? That you have a nominal group, you, it consists of a single word, a pronoun, and that have been working is in fact a group of words, a group of verbs in particular, a verbal group, and is discontinuous in this type of clause. What's this type of clause? Well, it's a yes-no interrogative clause, contrasting with the statement you have. And that goes back to our early discussion in lecture 1, exploring Michael Halliday's question of why does English insist on having a subject? Well, the subject here is you, and it has to be present so that it can vary the sequence of the finite have and the subject you. Have you versus you have. The verbal group, which as I said is discontinuous in this version, have been working, is followed by hard, which is an adverbial group consisting of an adverb, in this case the limiting case of a group, a single word, in this case of the class of adverb, and then this morning a nominal group with a pattern that we've already met earlier in this lecture, determiner plus noun. And again, we saw that part of the evidence is that you can move groups around the clause, but not individual words. So you could say, this morning have you been working hard, but not morning have you been working hard. This, it wouldn't work. So you have this rank-based organization, and what I've shown you here is a structure of the clause and the groups and the words, or at least of the clause of the groups. And these are what we might say class structures, because what I've labeled are the classes that the clause consists of. So there's just one clause, and it consists of 1, 2, 3, 4 classes of groups. Verbal group, discontinuous, nominal group, adverbial group, and again nominal group. And these groups in turn consist of words, again of different classes. The verbal group consists of a group of verbs, have, been, working. The first nominal group consists of a single nominal, a pronoun, you know, the limiting case, very hard. That's a group of adverbs, very plus hard. And then this morning is a nominal group consisting of 2 nominal words, a determiner and a noun. Now, as you recall in the previous segment of the lecture, I said this corresponds to the anatomy of a unit. This is the anatomy of the clause. But the anatomy doesn't tell us how these different parts contribute to the construction of meaning in the clause. And that's why we introduced a physiological perspective. So we said, complementing the anatomical view of the clause, we need a physiological view. So complementing the class-based structure, we need a function structure. We need to introduce functions that show clearly how these different groups in the clause contribute to the construction of meaning in the clause. So let me do that. To the left, you have what we started with, the class structure. Clauses consisting of groups, groups consisting of words. To the right, you have, as it were, spliced in for the clause, not for groups yet, but for the clause, the physiological perspective, the function structure. The function structure of the clause, then, means we're splicing in functional analysis to show the textual, interpersonal, experiential functions that the groups and phrases, if they're phrases, serve in the clause. And these functional elements, like theme plus rime, like mood plus residue, like process plus actor plus manner plus time, they actually indicate the contributions that the groups and possibly phrases make to the construction of meaning in the wordings of the clause. So class structure gives us the anatomy. It says what the clause consists of as far as groups are concerned, or phrases, groups and phrases, and words as far as groups are concerned. But when we add the function structure, we can also see how they contribute to the construction of meaning in the clause. And as I've already said previously in this lecture, there are 3 strands of meaning. There is yellow meaning, textual meaning, the clause is a message. There is red meaning, interpersonal meaning, the clause is a move. and blue meaning, experiential meaning, the clause as a figure. And all three are accounted for when we look at the clause as a construction, as a functional construction embodying three strands of meaning: textual, interpersonal, experiential. So this is what we call the metafunctional spectrum, showing how the clause is organized to construct meaning as wording. So in how we've been working very hard this morning, the different functional strands help us explain different aspects of the organization of the clause. And that's what we'll be pursuing starting next week with the textual strand, the textual layer, theme plus ring. And we'll be able to explore how the clause is adapted or tailored to its environment in the text. Here is another version of the example. Good morning. I'm working hard since 3 a.m. to get all your favorites ready. That's a nice text with an image or a little video clip from Facebook. Unfortunately, I haven't been. So there are no goodies waiting for you, only the goodies of presentations of the analysis of English grammar according to modern functional principles. And we'll come to this. You see, I've been working hard this morning. Why? Purpose, to get all your favorites ready. And that's one example of something you've been asking me about, which I'll come back to and give you answers to. I've been working hard since 3 a.m. That's a finite clause. And that contrasts with I had been or I will be. But to get all your favorites ready, that's a non-finite purpose clause, and it has an infinitive to get. And non-finite clauses with infinitives typically in English indicate purpose. And we'll be able to say why. We'll be able to explain that later on. So just a quick recap. We've met a number of dimensions in terms of which the lexicogrammar is organized. One rather fleetingly, the kind of delicacy, from grammar to lexis. And I referred to that when I talked about the frequency of grammatical and lexical items. And I said the most frequent items are all grammatical items. And when you begin to enter the region of less frequent items, you begin to encounter lexical items. We'll come back to this. I've only mentioned it in passing, as I said. But the two dimensions we've really focused on so far are the spectrum of metafunction. So the different strands of meaning that run through the grammar, like the clause. Experiential, clause as a figure. Interpersonal, clause as a move. And textual, clause as a message. So together they show how the talk clause contributes in the construction of meaning in text. And now I've reviewed the rank scale, the compositional hierarchy. So for English, clause consisting of group phrases consisting of morphemes, and morphemes consisting of words. Now we can intersect the second two dimensions, the spectrum of metafunction and the rank scale, as in fact I already hinted at when we started this segment 2.4. So when we intersect the rank scale and the spectrum of metafunction, we can create a map or matrix of the systems that together make up the wording potential of the lexicogram of language. What's the wording potential? Well, it's the potential for constructing meanings as wordings, as grammatical items, lexical items, and grammatical structures. And that will be our next step. That is, in fact, the schematic version I've shown you every new lecture. Well, lecture 1 and 2. So in this schematic version, I already labeled the dimensions. I said horizontally you have the spectrum of metafunction, the different strands of meaning that run through the grammar. and vertically you have the compositional hierarchy, the rank scale. Step by step we'll introduce a more detailed version, and we'll use this detailed version on our journey through the lexicogrammatical resources of English. This detailed version, you'll also find it in the folder with summaries and displays in the shared folder. So if we magnify this, you can see that the first two rows are concerned with the first top ranks in the rank scale. Clause consisting of group phrases. Let's focus on clause for now. Then you come down through from left to right the different strands of meaning, or the different metafunctional systems within the clause. Now the logical ones don't operate within the clause, they operate to combine clauses into chains of clauses. This happened, so that happened, or because this happened, that happened, or this happened, then that happened. These markers, so, then, because, if, and so on, mark logical semantic relations that are used to combine clauses. We'll come back to this. But internally in the clause, you have experiential, interpersonal, and textual. And these are the systems that we will focus on most of the time throughout the semester. So later on we'll be looking at systems for linking clauses into clause complexes. Chains of clauses that hang together, as it were, through logical semantic relations, like sequence in time, reason, condition, exemplification, rewording, addition, and so on. But most of the time we will focus on the three components or aspects that make up the resources of the clause, the internal organization of the clause. So system for organizing clauses internally. Experiential, the system of transitivity, clause as figure. Interpersonal, mood, and related systems, clause as move. And finally, textual, theme, and some other systems, clause as message. And this is where we will start. Textual systems of the clause as message. We'll move into this area, surveying it, exploring it, working with it next week, lecture 3. Then we'll move on to the interpersonal view of the clause as a move, and look at the root sources for negotiating meaning, negotiating positions in dialogue, the grammar of interaction. And finally, looking at the systems internal to the clause, we'll move on to transitivity, the resources for construing a quantum of change in our experience of the flow of events, the clause as a figure. And to remind you, these correspond to chapters 2, 3, and 4 in our textbook, DFG, Deploying Functional Grammar. You will already have looked at chapter 1, so for next week, have a look at chapter 2, and it's in your reading folders for lecture 3 in the Dropbox folder. We'll spend a few weeks on this, then we'll move on to chapter 3, mood and other related systems, and finally transitivity. Now each of these corresponds to one of the assignments. So chapter 2 corresponds to assignment 1, chapter 3 to assignment 2, and chapter 4 to assignment 3. We will have something to say about the logical resources for linking clauses, chaining clauses together into clause complexes, but you won't be tested on them in an assignment. Next week, and after a few weeks, and after a few more weeks. So let me just recap this with a little animation of going from analysis of a clause just in terms of class structure and then splicing in the function structure. Now we splice in the function structure and we get the three functional layers: textual, interpersonal and experiential. So the function structure of the clause means splicing into it a functional analysis to show how textual, interpersonal, experiential functions organize the groups and phrases that the clause consists of. Again, class structure is, as it were, the anatomy of the clause and of other units, whereas function structure is a physiology, and it's a physiology that shows us, that brings out the contributions of these groups and phrases in the clause, to show how they function, how they contribute to the construction of different kinds of meaning running through the clause. So that will be our point of departure, the metafunctional analysis of the clause, starting with the textual. And these bring out the complementary strands of meaning in the grammar. As I said, we move in through the clause. Now there is an optional reading. It's in your folder. You don't have to do it, but if you feel you'd like to deepen your reading a bit beyond the textbook Deploying Functional Grammar, there is a nice overview by Jeff Thompson in his Introducing Functional Grammar, Chapter 3. It's a voluntary reading. It's helpful, but if you don't feel that you have the time or energy or interest to pursue it, you don't have to. You should still be able to do the assignments. Next week then, Lecture 3, and we'll move into the textual organization of the clause. In other words, we'll be looking at the clause as a message or quantum of information in the flow of information. And the contents for next week will include a recap, of course, as always, and then we'll begin to look at the system of theme and different aspects of the system of theme. You've already had a preview of these coming attractions, as in the example, these magnificent men in their flying machines go up, tiddly up, up, and a few other examples. So good luck with the rest of the week and with the readings, the study for what you've already met in week 2 and looking ahead towards week 3, lecture 3.